of the family, and as far as people making a decent living, although we were segregated here, it did have a lot more opportunities than I see now. After coming back, like I say, I worked on just every initiative you can think to empower people, poor people and people of color. If you name it, I've done it. But until recently, until the last 4 years, I mainly worked with adults. I did not work with the youth. But I had an opportunity a few years ago. I did not want to work full-time, so I started subbing in the schools. And I subbed in the schools mainly at what is called WEPC, the Waterloo Educational Behavioral Center. So these are kids with some pretty challenging issues. And when I was working there, I noticed how the teachers weren't really relating very well to the kids, and then they could not understand how that the children would listen to me. But we had similar backgrounds, and also the other thing that was very important that I did, being a Waterloo native, I would always ask them about their family. And 9 times out of 10 I would know. I'd have to ask them who their grandparents were because I'm that age. And so then we would talk about what was going on with their families. And once we developed that relationship, you know, they would, you know, confide in me, and also I could step to them without them getting upset, although they did have some pretty serious behavioral problems. I never had a problem because of the way that I was able to relate with them. And so from there, I came back to working in the community because that was just, like I say, I was just subbing anyway. So I started working back at what we call the neighborhood hub, and we'll talk more about that. The neighborhood hub, where is located at a church, Mount Carmel Church, right in the heart of the African American community, so that families could come to the hub and feel that they had people there that really understood them, and some classes that would help empower them and their children. So having worked there, we came up with the ideas that we really need to start working on literacy. And I'll go, you wanted me to talk about how I came around to literacy. My main work was in diversity training and race relations. I'm co-chair of an organization called Citizens for Undoing Racism with Mayor John Cruz here from Cedar Falls. So my main focus was really on general racism, and but also during that time the focus became on the prison rates. Can I write that on the board?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some chalk right there.
Yeah, the prison rates. And so from there, this has been a progression that it went from adults and racism down to the kids. So this is like, I'll show you what Black Hawk County is like about nearly 9% African American, but the Black Hawk County Jail at any day has 50 to 52% of African Americans in jail.
We're saying the population is 52% African American, or?
I'm saying that the Black Hawk County census, we're 9%. African Americans are 9% of the county population, but 50 on any given day,
52% of the jail
50.
population.
So you see that disparity right there. But then it comes really stark when, and we'll talk later about why I give the children these statistics, then it becomes really stark. Iowa has about 3 million people in it, and for every 100,000 people, per 100,000 people in the state of Iowa, you have 194 white people in prison. You have 450 Latinos in prison per 100,000 people in the state of Iowa. Per 100,000 people, you have 2,700 African Americans in prison. And these numbers are unconscionable. And this is what I share with our students. Now then we go back to the education system. I don't have the latest on a dropout rate, but it's pretty high. It's 49%. But I'll give you the grade point average and what I don't have because it changed so often, but it's still high. The suspension rates, especially of African American boys, are about 20 times what it is for whites. But the grade point, we have two main high schools here, East and West High School. So at East High School, 66.7 of the students have a grade point of 2. African American students have a grade point of 2 and below. At West High School, 75% of the African American students have a grade point of 2 and below. So these are the things, and I wish I had brought the suspension rates, but like you say, they change, monthly. So this is what we are talking about. These are the stats that I share with the kids so that they can really, and the parents, because I started out with the parents, and now we went to the children. The other thing about this stat right here, the prison rate, has to do with, I go to so many workshops and conferences, and I repeat things that I hear, but sometimes, when you hear something and you're repeating it, it doesn't really hit you. But it is said that you can determine the number of prison beds by the 3rd grade reading scores. And I repeated that over the years, and then just recently we had a couple of national speakers here, and then the light bulb really came on. And that's what really got me into literacy, and I'll read a few things out of the book too, but that if you can determine the 3rd grade, and why is that? I found out that up to your teachers, up to 3rd grade, you are learning to read. After 3rd grade, you're reading to learn. There's nothing else in the curriculum that will help you learn. So if you miss that, then you have missed a lot. And I noticed that with the kids that I was working with when I was subbing. So that's what sort of brought me back to, okay, well, all of this is going on, but we're not getting the reading scores and I call the schools, by the way. We have some problems with the schools. I think they think I'm a troublemaker or something. But I called and I asked, can you give me the reading scores of all of the elementary schools in Waterloo broken down by race? I've asked for that information about 4 or 5 times, and I have not been able to get it. So in the meantime, working with parents, I am asking the parents.
Just to clarify, so you're saying they base the numbers of prison spaces that they'll need in the future based on the 3rd grade reading scores
Yes.
of the African American kids.
Yes,
Okay.
and that has been repeated over and over, and I wasn't really connecting it
Okay.
until recently, because if you miss that, when you get to 4th grade, I'm not a teacher, but after 4th grade, that is not your reading to learn.
Yeah, so the curriculum is no longer helping kids learn how to read. It's more,
Right.
okay, using what skills they're supposed to develop by 3rd grade to learn the material.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So what that means too, to me,
To try to get that data out of them, do you think they're not telling you because they don't have the data broken down like that, or because they don't really want to give it out?
they don't want to give it out. And we're just going around. The other thing that Dr. Meacham, we talked about, and I hope it comes out during the course of this, that we don't want you so isolated from the community. We're not working against the school. We need to work together, you know, on this. I mean, the problem is, and Janice, I'll read a couple of passages from the book, but the schools have seemed to put this wall up. We're here, we're the educators of your children, and this information you don't need. When I think it would be more helpful.
So you're saying that you would like teachers to see people like yourself who are working with kids in the community as kind of allies with the same mission versus an oppositional sort of thing.
Yes, yes, and that's why, that's the way it's going right now. If you call up the school and say, I have a program, or I'd like to work with the kids, and you'll hear parents say also, when they try to visit the school, I've had several parents tell me this, how they were treated when they came to the school. You should be welcoming parents. And then you have the set of parents who probably did not have good relations in school and feel intimidated.
So what are some of the stories, if you could just elaborate, just a general theme?
Well, one mother, they were saying that her son was having some difficulties, so she just wanted to go up and observe him and sit in the classroom. And they made her feel, she didn't tell me specifically, but so uncomfortable, asking her a lot of questions. Well, why are you here? He'll be all right. We know how to take care of this. And I just thought that. And then there was another time that a pastor, we had a really active pastor that was transferred, but Reverend, I think his name was Reverend Baring, and he really wanted to be part of the school. He saw this as a really big problem, so he went up to one of the high schools, and he just wanted to help the teachers out. They set him in the principal's office for about 2 hours, and then the principal came in and said, oh, well, I don't think we really, need your help here. And Reverend Baring, he was quite the activist, and he was really on to something. He was saying, he was wanting his congregation to come up and be a part of that, and for the kids to see more of us in the classroom, helping out. And I know that it made a difference when I was subbing, because I could, really relate to the kids. I knew a lot of their grandparents or aunts and uncles. So
Often if parents themselves don't feel comfortable going to a school, won't they often ask their pastors, for example, to go up there and see about their kids?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have gone, me and Felicia works at the hub, we have gone up to the school with the parents on the parents' behalf, and also set in when they were doing their IEPs and helped to explain to parents what was going on, or if they had been suspended and coming back, to let the schools know that they had an ally. They could not, because we were in the community, really say, because this was our jobs to, and those parents were in our program, so while they may have been not too happy with us being there, that is something that they really could not say anything about.
A question from the reading. Reading basically said that often black parents and kids or black parents in particular are represented as in terms of their problems and being pathological. And you work with parents who are going through struggles, and I was wondering, to the extent, what have you observed from working with parents that really defies that negative label that's often, given to the black parents, especially in relation to education?
Well, what I have been able to do is that, especially with the parents, that we all have strengths, and just to hone in. I mean, a single mother just keeping a roof over their child's head and keeping the lights on, we have complimented them on that and how you're doing that, and we've just made sure that we kind of build up on the strengths and not seeing, it is pathological, as you say, which is part of the problem. If you're working with these parents and the students, and the story about, some of the students are quite entrepreneurial. I can't say the word, but entrepreneurial. And that's a skill. That's a gift. Whatever their gift is, they can sing. They write poetry. It's not maybe what you see as traditional, but if you hone in on that thing that the parents and the kids love, then you'll be able to help them. I want to read a couple of things from, did you guys read this reading?
They read the introduction and the first chapter that you gave us.
Okay, and by the way, this is Janice Helm. She was here last year at the African American Children and Families Conference, but I met her, if you see this book is so old, I met her like 20 years ago at San Diego State. I have carried this book around with me. It never leaves me. It did go down in the box for a moment. That's why you see it. But I want to read something I think is interesting, and I think we need to maybe have a little conversation around this on page 2 of the introduction. Do you guys have that out? Because this is a very important part that she's talking about here. And this is what, gosh, that next to the last paragraph where it starts with, during the 60s, concern grew in the black community. It says, I start with that sentence, the black community indicted the American educational system for attempting to socialize black children into accepting the history, culture, value system, and behavioral patterns of Anglo-Americans. This is very important with what we were trying to do this summer. This next sentence. Black people need to maintain a clear identity of themselves as an oppressed people if they are going to make a contribution to the struggle for liberation. The liberation struggle is long range. Therefore, the educational process must serve a conscious raising function that will prepare black people to make a contribution to a struggle that began centuries before they were born and will extend centuries after their deaths. That is why it is so important that I give these statistics. That is the very reason I give these statistics, so that black children can begin to understand that this just did not happen overnight, that the struggle continues, and that you need to strive for excellence, not say, oh, it's white, use the term, it's too white to be smart, and that. So the other thing that she says here is,
well, could you stop and just explain that last, comment that you hear kids say, or that you want to make sure kids don't believe? Why would they think that?
I don't know. That is hard to say. You don't like John
Ogbu.
Right? Ogbu, but he says that, it's trying to be more like anti-cultural. It's trying to maintain an identity that's a false identity, that if you're striving to get ahead, then you're going to leave your people behind. You want to stay here. I think it has more to do with that.
Okay. So you're saying that if somebody's trying, they're surrounded by a situation where there's no one educated in their families, no one really benefiting from college education or that sort of thing, and then they strive to get it, that there's almost like a peer pressure of not doing that, because then if you become different because of education, where does that leave us?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So then that's why they really have to understand that that is something, and once you know your history, which is not taught much, that's the other thing in school that I mentioned to the superintendent, is about having history.
So that through history they can see that,
right,
okay, there are educated African Americans, even though you may not be experiencing it personally.
Right.
Okay.
And then the other thing I think that Janice is saying in this book too is the fact that because we do have some cultural differences, that you must take those cultural styles into consideration when you're teaching children, because it's from different cultures, to incorporate that into your teaching.
Any other questions that you had written down?
Nothing from, what did you think about, because I haven't read that for a while, the other reading from Hacker.
Oh, the Two Nations?
Two Nations.
I had one that wasn't necessarily related to what we were just talking about, but I thought of it in the reading. It said something about celebrating other cultures a lot in the classroom. And I talked about that in, I can't remember what class it was an online class last semester, and we read a book about diversity in the classroom. And one of the issues was how to do that without only doing it certain times of the year, such as Christmas or things like that. There was a specific term, but I forget what it was. So as a teacher, I guess I was just wondering how to celebrate other cultures throughout the year and not just at certain times.
That's actually, it should be integrated into the history books, but I think that's something you could bring in. There's a good book called The People's History by Howard Zinn. And
if you're interested in history, you have to write that down. That's a very, very important book.
Yeah, read that. And then you just kind of, The People's History by, and documents all of the cultures and that came to this country and how they integrated. So just having that as a supplement and putting it with that, or just using that if you ever get Are there any classes that use that as a history?
I'm not sure. Usually it's people like yourself who've actually who've read it and been impacted by it, have that consciousness that there's so much. It's called The People's History of the United States. And it not only deals with cultural diversity, it deals with class diversity. Because if you really think about it, what do we know about the experiences of working class Americans during different historical periods? We really don't. We don't even know that much about non-slaveholding whites during slavery. So there's this whole gap of historical knowledge that we just don't have as an American people, regardless of cultural perspective. And so one of the perspectives related to teaching that addresses your question, Allie, is that for if you're talking about history or literature, there's a practice that's advocated called multiple perspectives, because usually if you really think about it and look at it, you're getting a single historical account. And so just by doing that, it's going to leave holidays out, cultures out, wherever they come from, be they religious or cultural, whatever, they're going to leave things out if you have single historical accounts. But if you look at any historical time period or artistic movement, it's going to have multiple perspectives involved. So as a teacher, you may have a textbook which is giving a single historical account, or kind of literary period, they're going to have single literary movements. But then if you think, okay, there's got to be other perspectives, it might take more work on your part, and that's a challenge as a teacher, but they're all multiple perspectives to draw from, and you can integrate those. So if you have that consciousness that, okay, this isn't going to be telling my students the whole story, there's going to be other things that they would need to know. And that's where the People's History is a good resource, because the whole book is written from multiple perspectives. It doesn't attempt to, say this is the single defining, quote-unquote, American experience related to this event. So it's going to give you those multiple perspectives. And so it's a kind of a one-stop place where you can get different stories to incorporate into your curriculum.
And just
excellent question.
Yeah, it is an excellent question, and hopefully, I know you guys all want teaching jobs, but hopefully you don't get one in Texas, because they are trying to erase a lot of history and wash it out. They were doing something with slavery, taking slavery out of the...
I'm not sure, but Texas is very controversial, because most of the textbooks are geared towards, because Texas buys so many textbooks in California, that whatever they want is more like the industry gives them.
Right.
And so that's where it's kind of a challenge to find diversity where in a place that's trying to eliminate some of the story.
Okay. So are there any other questions?
Okay, just from knowing, you had talked about freedom schools as something that inspired you and thought were an effective educational model. Could you explain, what freedom schools are and why you feel that was an important model for education for African Americans in a certain period?
Okay. Back in the early 60s, when we did not have the right to vote in Mississippi, and there was a movement on to educate African Americans of all ages, adults and kids, about the right to vote. Has anybody heard of the organization SNCC? Stokely Carmichael, Fannie Lou Hamer?
Also Jane Fonda, not John Hayden and
Harry Belafonte, Martin Luther King. But anyway, what they did was develop a series of freedom schools where they taught Black history, they taught the importance to vote. And as a result of that, of the freedom schools, Mississippi ended up challenging the Democratic Party. If you go back to history, there were, gosh, this is hard to say, but there was a white citizens council. This will remind you of Ferguson, Missouri. Have you guys been watching what's going on in Ferguson? Okay. That's why history, I'll have to do my little thing on the board too. But in Mississippi at the time, the majority of the population was black. But we could not vote. And we could not vote because there was an organization called the White Citizens Council that was controlling all of the policies and politics of Mississippi. So what they did was started a freedom school to teach people what was going on with the White Citizen Council, the tactics that they were using, and to teach them how, through education, how to be able to fight that. And Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the giants of that movement. But they would have schools at churches, after schools, and just teaching the Constitution, what the rights were, history.
Okay.
Handle this out.
Okay.
Once you get to know the families and backgrounds to them, if they are suffering a lot of ACEs, that is trauma, PTSD. And many of our kids are suffering that. And what I'm handing out to you now is like really important. This is what happens when there's early childhood trauma. Actually, the brain stops developing. You have development traits and behaviors. Slowed language and reading, lateralization, diminished IQ, poor decision-making skills, but also if your kids ADHD and ADD, attention problems, aggressive behavior. Then it goes over significant early use and abuse of alcohol, and illicit prescription drugs. Then you go to this column right here. Okay, you end up in a special education, school failure, dropping out, expulsion, delinquency, and then for this last column, low-wage jobs, unemployment, public assistance, and prison. So we have, and I should add, I'd like to add poverty to that ACE. Poverty and racism to the ACEs, so that gives you a double whammy. So many of the students that you're going to be working with, not many of the students, depending on where you are, especially if you're in an urban area, these things are happening. And on the back, what you're looking at is they cluster, some of it is on the back here. They cluster around, can I have this? Some of them print on the back. They cluster around, if you have physical violence in a home, you're 63% more chance of having 4 or more ACEs. If there's violence between adults, you are 66% chance of having 4 or more ACEs. And the thing that is really related to this right here, if you have an incarcerated household member, you are 79% chance of having 4 or more ACEs.
Now, some of your programs that you work with parents, aren't they connected to strategies or practices which help alleviate some of the trauma that are experienced with the ACEs, or help to, help people get through those kinds of things?
This is what you have to pass out. The good news is.
Okay, all right, all right.
If you are working, and this is the work I do, this is the real work I do here. The good news is that those ACEs can be neutralized and negated if you're programming, if you put things in place, these 5 protective factors to help the parents, and that's what we're doing right now. Okay. I don't know if I have enough of these.
Again, relationship with a committed adult for the kid's perspective is part of these protective factors.